to and fro as dark waves start to grow. The evening breezes turn, violent waters are now stirred. Ships find their way to the bottom of a deep blue grave, as those aboard believe that hope lies where they be. The chant of those that sing, the world does also sing. We're safe here in our ship, trust the boat and know what you bring. The lies are all around, and truth is hardly found. But burning this sailor's heart is the way of the set apart. Yeshua is my rock and salvation, I trust in his foundation. He's my anchor when I'm wrestling the storm. He's my anchor, I rely on the Lord. He's my anchor, I shall not be afraid. No weapon formed against me shall prosper, for surely he is my anchor in the storm. Trials come like waves, the called out find the faith. Among the many lost, the faithful find the cause. Choose whom you will serve, Yahuwah or the wretched world. There's only one way to find hope that never dies. Yeshua is my rock and salvation, I trust in his foundation. He's my anchor when I'm wrestling the storm. He's my anchor, I rely on him for war. He's my anchor, I shall not be afraid. No weapon formed against me shall prosper, for surely he is my anchor in the storm.
And Shabbat Shalom, guys. We are live on Now You See TV with the Virtual House Church. Now, we're going to wait for Rob Skiba. He's going to be joining us in a few moments. Rob's running a little behind tonight, so he's going to jump on, and we're going to kick off Virtual House Church with tonight's Torah portion, which I believe is Ekev. I can double check that. But while we're waiting for Rob to join us, let me go ahead and let everybody who is joining us on YouTube know that you can come over to the Now You See TV Fellowship chat. We're going to be drawing questions and discussing different things about this Torah portion. So let me just go ahead and show you really quick how you can do that. Jump right over to nowuctv.org. And at the top of the page, you can scroll down, and here you can see Virtual House Church. Now, whenever you click it and you scroll down, you can see where you can watch the episode live and also the fellowship chat. Now, in the fellowship chat, we're going to be drawing questions for Rob, and anybody who wants to join the show later on tonight. I'm going to be posting a link here so that people can jump into the Google Hangout and you can ask questions live if that interests you. You know, we love to have a good community, especially for Virtual House Church. It's very important for us to be able to talk with you guys and get to know you, and we'd love to have you on if you'd want to join us. This past week, me and John have been working a lot on our upcoming documentary, which is going to be a documentary on false immortality. It's exposing vampirism, and it's just going to be so awesome. I just got done chopping up a lot of the footage that we got when we went to New Orleans, and we interviewed a lady there who was very heavily involved in the like esoteric underbelly of New Orleans. And so one of the reasons we were drawn to that place is it's kind of considered the vampire capital of the world. And so in order to really expose the mindset that goes behind this false immortality and be able to really expose it, we had to have somebody from that side. I'm just telling you this little story while we wait for Rob. We arrive in New Orleans and we meet up with Andy Pellerano. And for those of you who have not seen Andy, we posted a rap music video that we shot for him the night we arrived after we got our footage. And also he was up hanging out with us this past Tuesday and Wednesday. So we did an episode with him Tuesday night. He did a little bit of a instrumental impromptu performance at the end of the episode. It was awesome. So anyways, Andy's just this on-fire guy for God. There in New Orleans, and they have this giant bus, and the bus has the words "Jesus is the plug" all written across the side, and on the front it says Salvation Station. So this is definitely a loaded up vehicle. It's a vehicle that it's turning heads in the city of the French Quarter and stuff that he's been showing us around. So we load all our camera gear, we load everything we need to film for the documentary, and it ends up that we pull up to this lady's house, and she's like this vampire tour guide basically, and we pull up to her house in this giant Salvation Station wagon, and you should have seen her face when we got out of it, and she was just like, "Is this an evangelical attack?" It was awesome. But we are joined by Rob Skiba, and before I finish off there, you guys should definitely check out Andy Pellerano's stuff that we've done early last week, or early this week actually. Anyways, we're joined by Rob Skiba. What's up, Rob?
Hey man, I just come in and hear you talking about like vampire chicks or something. So I don't know what am I missing?
Yeah, I was telling him a little bit about the film we got for the shots we got for the documentary we're working on false immortality. And we had just a crazy experience in New Orleans whenever we went to interview the expert of vampires in the vampire capital of the U.S. So it was just an awesome experience, and I was telling them to look forward for that documentary because we've been working on it all week, and I'm really excited for it. It's gonna be really cool.
Crazy! Wow! All right, awesome. Well, sorry I'm late. I was out and about and trying to get back home in time, and finally just got in. So let me go ahead and do a little screen share here. And go ahead and get started. Here we go. Okay. You see the Virtual House Church website up there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Cool. All right, everybody, welcome to Virtual House Church. I'm your host, Rob Skiba, and you already know Jake, so we'll just go ahead and jump in. I believe this week we are doing Deuteronomy week number 46, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just take a look at my notebook here, and I do believe that is true. Yes. Okay, cool. So if you just go to the Virtual House Church website, virtualhousechurch.com, that takes you to the homepage. And on the homepage, you'll see some resources there, especially if you scroll down, you see this map right here. If you're looking for a place to fellowship with people, one-on-one, or many people to get together with and break bread and pray with each other and stuff like that, fellowship. Well, each one of these blue dots represents somebody usually meeting together in somebody's home. And you just kind of zoom in and you look at the United States, there are lots of blue dots. I mean, you just click on one, pops up. In this case, I got James Blankenship, it looks like. Blankenship. That's in Alabama. So if you guys happen to live in that area there in, what's that, Tuscumbia, Alabama, there's an email address. You can contact him. So I just randomly clicked on one there, but you can do that too. A lot of people are doing this, and it's real exciting that there's a resource like this. I got this from 119 Ministries, and they've made this app available. So yeah, check that out. In the meantime, we're doing this in a virtual environment here on the internet, and that's why I call it the Virtual House Church. If you're new, you should check out the Coming Out of Babylon link. That's a link that's basically for people who are brand new to this. You can listen to some old radio shows that I did on Getting Back to Basics, parts 1 and 2, and other resources here, books and videos, lots of stuff to check out here. If you're a newbie, that's a good place to start. Otherwise, we're doing what we call the weekly Torah Portions, and that's where somebody a long time ago, thousands of years ago, split the Torah up into weekly reading cycles so that you go through the entire Torah in a year. And then when the prophets came along, they started adding sections from the prophets that went along with the Torah portion for that particular week. And then, of course, after the New Testament was written, the New Testament was added as well. So literally everybody who's doing Torah portions all around the world, we're all doing the same one at the same time, or not necessarily the same time because 24 different time zones, but on the same day, essentially, on Shabbat. Everybody's doing the study. And so this week's particular study, if you scroll down to Deuteronomy week number 46, it's called Ekev, and that's Deuteronomy 7:12 through 11:25, and the prophets Isaiah 49:14 through 51:3. And these are the scripture references for the New Testament. If you just click on those, it takes you to Bible Gateway, and you can read along there. I've already done 2 years of pretty extensive study that I put online. Again, I'm sorry this plugin's not working, but if you go to the Revolutionary Radio Project on the Blog Talk Radio, you can listen to the archive from 2013. I took the archived audio from 2014 and put video to it. You can watch that study right there. And then there's this video right here. It's called Parsha in 60 Seconds. There's a ministry out there that goes by that name, Parsha in 60 Seconds. Parsha is just the Hebrew word for study. And so what they've done essentially is distill the Torah portion down to 60 seconds. And I like to play that sort of sets the stage for the topic for this evening. So I'll go ahead and play that for us here, and we'll get started.
Today's portion is from Deuteronomy 7:12, 11:25. It is called Ekev, which means if you follow. Moses tells the Israelites that if they obey God's rule, God would truly maintain the covenant. The Israelites were to destroy all the people whom God delivered to them, showing no pity and not worshiping their gods. They were to burn all idols and not keep anything. God recalls the lessons he taught the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. Miraculously, their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet swell for 40 years. God disciplined them as a man disciplines his son. Moses warns the Israelites that they were to dispose nations greater than they, but God would go before them as a devouring fire to drive out the land's inhabitants. God had not enabled them to possess the land because of their virtue, but God was disposing the land's current inhabitants because of their nation's wickedness, and was fulfilling the oath that God had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses then reminded them about the incident with the golden calf and retells the story. Moses then reminds the Israelites of how they provoked God. Moses had to lay prostrate before God for 40 days because God was determined to destroy the Israelites. Moses recalls the 2 tablets from the Ark of the Covenant and the death of Aaron and the promotion of Eleazar. Moses describes God as supreme, great, mighty, and awesome, showing no favor and taking no bribe, but upholding the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriending the stranger. Moses then says the Shema and instructs the binding of scripture on their hands and foreheads, which is known today as laying the filling. Also the posting of scripture on the door, which is known today as the mezuzah. And that is Ekev in 60 seconds.
Wow, a lot packed into that one. So that's this week's Torah portion. Always recommend the links that are typically below that video on each page. It's the commentaries by a woman named Ardell from yourlivingwaters.com. Always recommend checking those out. Very interesting, insightful writings there. And looks like some deleted videos, and didn't have a whole lot of commentary that particular at least not on the webpage. I'm sure there's plenty to look at in the video. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to check out this study right here. And in the meantime, well, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can just kind of open the floor up for discussion.
Right on. Well, oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback there, bro. All right.
We can kill that. Try it. How about now?
Yeah. All right. That's better. All right. So just a reminder, guys, while we're discussing, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we'd love to get to them here in a moment. So definitely in this Torah portion, there's a couple things that I wanted to bring onto the discussion table, things that I think are very interesting and stand out to me in the portion. But I think the first one I would want to kind of ask your opinion on and see if you had any insight on is the whole idea of laying prostrate. So we see in this Torah portion that Moses has to lay prostrate for 40 days. And then, throughout the prophets, we see examples of laying prostrate through the kings whenever they're being repentant. And you see, of course, I think it was Ezekiel laid on his side prostrate. So what is this concept of laying prostrate? Why is it a recurring theme in Scripture? And why does God seem to like it so much?
Well, I mean, I would just be speculating on it, but I would say it's probably just an ultimate act of submission. Just, whatever you want, God. That's what it would mean to me. I mean, it's basically an ultimate act of submission, just laying down on your face before a holy God and saying, okay, I'm interceding, I'm praying, I want to hear from you, it would be a humbling thing. It would be an act of discipline. I mean, I don't know that I could lay there that long, and in fact, I'm a stomach sleeper. So that might work out a little bit well for me because I sleep on my stomach anyway. So if I was just already prostrate, I'm laying out on my stomach, I'd probably sleep okay that way. But like Ezekiel, I mean, he had to lay on his side for 390 days. Like I couldn't do that, So I mean, that's a disciplined, extreme act of submission is basically how I would view it.
Yeah, I think just the whole process of both Moses laying on his laying down for 40 days and also Ezekiel, they're doing this act for the people, and it's kind of the concept of outward signs of repentance for your nation or for the people around you, and laying prostrate is like, I'm sure whenever they look at a prophet or somebody, they're like, hey, give help us out, stand up and walk. But when you're laying down, you're just completely, they have to drag you around pretty much to get you to do what they want you to do. So if you want to make a stand, then lay down, lay down kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Especially kind of how he's making a stand for the sins of the people, and and not actually standing while he does it. He's laying flat down. So I thought that was interesting. The mezuzah is another thing that comes out in this Torah portion that I wanted to get your take on. The whole idea of having the mezuzah on the doorway, on the door frame, and what significance do we have, with writing the words of Yahweh on our door frames,
mm-hmm.
And on the posts. That's such a deep, awesome rabbit trail that I know I only really started to see the value of, in the past few years as I've been
mm-hmm.
studying out the Torah portion. So, what do you have on the mezuzah?
Yeah. Well, since I moved to Texas in 2003, and the whole time I've been here, I've lived in rental properties, so I can't really just do whatever I want, to the dwelling place that I'm living in. Right. But I know people who have houses that they own and whatnot, that they have stuff like that. The mezuzah, I think it's become sort of a commercialized way of doing this. Roll up a scroll, put it in a fancy little box kind of thing, and screw it into the door frame of your house. I don't know that it specifically tells us to do it that way. It's a convenient way of doing it. But I also know people who have written out the words that usually are traditionally put on the door. They've actually, in calligraphy or some other kind of nice handwriting or whatever, have written them out across the door frame. And I think that's really cool because you see it when you go into your house, you see it when you come out of your house, and so to me, it functions in the same way, or has perhaps the same sort of function that the tzitzit have. I mean, the tzitzit we wear them because it's supposed to tell us, to remind us, every time we look down, okay, I should be keeping the commandments. Every time you put your clothes on, I should be keeping the commandments. Well, every time you leave your home and go into your home, it's the same thing. Reminder of who you belong to and how you should act both at home as well as outside. So, and if you look at that whole passage, I was just kind of looking through my notes in my notebook here, that the mark, basically like the mark of God, it's in Deuteronomy 11, verse 18. Therefore shall ye lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be frontlets between your eyes. So you have a mark, if you will, or a sign, if you will, on your right hand and between your eyes. And while some take that to be very physical, literal, and they'll actually put a box between their eyes, or have something wrapped around their hand, as a physical, tangible, literal interpretation of that. But I think there's an extended meaning to that, is that what your hand goes to do, and what you think about, and what you see, and all of that. These are, again, words of remembrance to call us back to being obedient to Him. And that's one of the reasons why I've come to, I think it was one of the previous shows we did where we're talking about what is the mark of the beast. And my thoughts on the mark of the beast have been evolving over the years recently. And it seems to me, yes, there may be a physical, tangible, literal mark of some sort that is either on the forehead or hands or internally in your body. Or let's say it could be a counterfeit to this, and going strictly biblical and letting the Bible interpret itself, it's making more sense to me that it's the antithesis of this, is where you've got a choice. You could walk in the ways of Yahuwah, doing His feasts and His rules and doing things His way, or you could do the antithesis of that and go the way of the world, or the way of the god of this world, and who ultimately I think is Satan / Nimrod, Nimrod being his playing piece on the chessboard, if you will, that a lot of the counterfeit, what I now call beast feasts, are associated with. So and I've joked about it before, I think even here last week or somewhere recently, that when I first was driving to Texas from Massachusetts, I saw the biggest billboard I've ever seen in my life, and it said, "Saturday is a true Sabbath, Sundays of the devil," and it was like, this huge billboard. I'm like, whoa. But now I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, the Sabbath is. There's a big argument. There's a big debate. There's the lunar Sabbatarians. I get your argument. Okay, I understand. I'm not on your page, not yet, anyway. But I understand the argument. I've read the arguments. I get it. But for now, I'm in the camp that subscribes to the notion that Saturday is the Sabbath. And actually, what came up in last week's discussion in our physical house church was that the Muslims worship on Friday. Christians and or I would say Jews and Messianic Christians and Torah folk do it on Saturday, and standard Christianity does it on Sunday. So it's sort of like you've got three to choose from, and when you look at Friday and Sunday in particular, it doesn't fit the biblical narrative, whereas Saturday does. And some people, well, how do we know it's still Saturday? Saturday's always been Saturday. Well, I mean, at least in my research, I've looked back as far as I could find records of anything, and in multiple cultures, it appears that what we now call Saturday has always been the seventh day of the week. You know, the word Saturday is a late comer into the language of humanity. You know, Saturn's Day, if you want to say it that way, that came way later. It was known as the seventh day. But when you look at multiple cultures and multiple languages, even to this day, the word they use for Saturday is a derivative of either the Greek Sabbaton or the Hebrew Shabbat. In fact, I asked my friend Peter, who grew up in Greece, I said, you know, if I said Sabbaton, what did you just hear? He goes, well, that'd be like Saturday. You know, so to me, that's pretty strong evidence that the seventh day has always been the seventh day, and multiple cultures and multiple languages use a word for the day you and I call Saturday, that is derived either from the Greek Sabbaton or the Hebrew Shabbat. So then that would say to me, if you think that Sunday has replaced Sabbath, and that's sort of the new Sabbath, then it's a different mark. Because all through the Torah, we have our Father saying, look, this is the seventh day Sabbath is the mark between, and it's extended when it talks about the feasts and other things. And he's like, look, let this be a sign on your hand and on in between your eyes, your forehead, if you will, that you are mine. You know, like this. This is in our culture. This signifies, okay, I'm married. You know, this is an outward sign that I'm taken, you know, and committed to somebody else. Well, I mean, God set aside certain rules that would serve the function of saying, hey, these are mine. You know, if you want to think of it like a wedding band or something like that, it's an expression that commits us to him and shows that we are his. And so if you're going to reject all that and go with the beast feast and, you know, all these other things, then you're effectively putting your hand to those things and you're setting your mind on those things. And to me, that is another form of a mark of the beast. So, you know, I just think that and last week, we didn't even talk about this last week. But if we go back to last week's Torah portion, we ended up talking about this at some length in our regular house church, where it talks about in Deuteronomy chapter 4, and it specifically says, don't make a likeness of things on earth or the likeness of birds or fish. And yet, what does Christianity have for symbols? Well, we got a fish, a bird, and a tree cross. Right? I mean, it's like, and it specifically tells you, yeah, don't do that. You know, that's one of the reasons we purged our house a while ago of such symbols. But I mean, like, he's laid it all out for us. It's all right here.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I want to kind of touch on that you mentioned was, you know, the whole idea of the mark of the beast. And, you know, one of the biggest questions that I have about the mark itself is it's really the finality of it. And it seems to imply that whoever does take the mark of the beast, it's over for them. You know, that they can't untake it. And so I've always really wondered about that aspect of it, because I thought the parallel you drew between the mezuzah and tzitzits was very interesting, because it's a sign, it's a symbol, it's an outward thing that reminds us of an inward process. We have something that we're physically doing, like we have the tzitzits that we look down and we remember, oh, the commandments are something I need to be paying attention to. I need to remember Yahweh everywhere I go, and it's something, one, that sets you apart, and two, reminds you that you need to be walking according to the Father's ways. And so whenever you look at the mezuzah, it's also an outward thing that is reflecting an inward pull that you have to obey the scriptures. So I think that the parallel that you were making with is keeping the Sabbath or Sunday mark of the beast a possible thing, like the actions behind doing different various things. So I think it's just a very interesting parallel that in the scriptures we've we've kind of lost the concept that it's through physically walking something out that God is going to reveal a spiritual principle to us, and we've super spiritualized a lot of this stuff. I mean, what you were talking about Sunday and Saturday, well, if the Sabbath was changed anywhere in Scripture, I want to see that verse. And
it doesn't exist.
There's an awesome resource that people can use. That it's a online resource. It's called the Blue Letter Bible. All right, and so if you get on Blue Letter Bible, you can type in the word first day or the first day of the week, or whatever, any way you want to phrase it. And what you're going to find is this. You're going to find about 8 times in the New Testament is the word first day of the week used. And of course, this is always what these 8 verses have to be what justifies Sunday being the new Sabbath or a change taking place. Out of these 8 verses where it mentions first day of the week, we don't see that, though. The majority of them, I believe 5 or 6 out of the 8, are all referring to the first day of the week that Yeshua raised out of the grave, which was the Feast of First Fruits, by the way. And then the rest of them were, different times that he met with them, but nowhere is it a command that the Sabbath is now on the first day and that some new thing has been created. However, on the flip side, you have the Sabbath day, and if you search that in Blue Letter Bible, you're going to find that over 56 times in the New Testament did the apostles and the first century believers were meeting on the Sabbath day. They were going into the synagogues. They were learning the Torah. They were learning Moses. They were preaching. They were doing a ton of stuff on the Sabbath day. They were going into the synagogues to preach on the Sabbath day. And there's just so much evidence that the Sabbath day was still something that the believers were keeping. They didn't just throw it to the wayside, and it's something that throughout Scripture we see the Sabbath day is also considered a sign, just like how the mezuzah, how the tzitzits, they are a sign to that sets us apart, a sign that makes us a unique people. And in the same way, the Sabbath is something that sets his people apart. It's a sign between Yahweh and his people. So just this Torah portion seems to have signs written all over it. Physical signs that either remind us of a spiritual principle or something that we need to walk out because it keeps us mindful of the Father.
Yeah. Well, you brought up an interesting point regarding the first day of the week issue. And if people want to check this out, they can go to my website, robschannel.com. And when you go to robschannel.com, look in the main menu, you'll see a link that says Facebook Notes. Scroll down to where it says Ephraim Awakening. That takes you to this page right here. And if you scroll down the Ephraim Awakening page to where it says Commandments, Sabbaths, and the Feast, you got a link right here, first day of the week or first the Sabbaths. And if you click on that, it takes you to my Facebook note on it. And first thing you'll notice is the word day in your Bible. If you've got like a King James is good about showing words that were inserted into the text that don't exist when the translators took liberty to insert words there. Sometimes it's needed for grammatical reasons, but other times I contend that some of these italicized words were put in because of personal bias. And I contend this is one of those cases. The word day does not exist in the original text. And so you have the word first, and then you have the word that's translated into week. Well, if you actually look up the Greek word for week, it's something like heptoma or something like that. But if you look on like blueletterbible.com or org or whatever it is, or if you look at, I use Bible Hub sometimes for the same thing, Bible Hub or Bible.cc. And if you use the tool, you'll see that the word used there that's translated into week is the word Sabbaton. Well, the Sabbaton I just mentioned earlier is the word for Sabbath. I mean, everywhere you see the word Sabbath in the New Testament, it's coming from the word Sabbaton. And so what you have there in the Greek is miaton sabbaton is what is translated into first day of the week. Well, day is not anywhere in that Greek phrase. And I just mentioned the word for week is not Sabbaton, it's heptoma. So really, I was like really confused. I called my friend Peter. I said, okay, and I love calling him because he doesn't have any dog in this hunt. He's just out there doing his thing, and he speaks Greek fluently, so I can throw words and phrases at him, and he has no idea what the argument is or the debate or anything. He's just answering the question. So I'll say, "Hey Peter, if I say to you, Miaton Sabiton, what did you just hear?" And he said, "One time on Saturday." So and that's what he said to me. One time on Saturday was his response for Miaton Sabaton, which is everywhere translated as first day of the week. Now, I have heard a counter argument to that is that Mia, and the way it's written, it means like first of the Sabbaths. And so they take creative liberty, knowing that Sabbath is the seventh day, to say first of the Sabbath really means first day of the week. No, it could also mean, and I think I make a pretty good case for this in this blog, is that it means first of the Sabbaths. And if you look at the many times that that phrase is used, it's usually used in reference in terms of time at a point between Passover and Pentecost. Well, it's in that time period that's the only time period where you actually count Sabbaths. You're counting Sabbaths to Pentecost. So first of the Sabbaths, especially in the context of when the discussion's taking place. And I you could go through this whole thing and read through it, but I mean, I take you through the verses, each one, and how it's used, and what people are doing before and after that. And I said, let's see. Well, I'll just go ahead and read it here. The same is true for Acts 20, verse 7. Let's back up to verse 6, though, for context. This is one of the proof texts people use for first day of the week. Acts 20, beginning verse 6. And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. And upon the first day of the week, this is Miaton Sabaton, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. Here we see that they concluded the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in less than a week, they arrived in Troas, apparently in time to celebrate the feast of the 7 Sabbaths that are counted leading to Pentecost. Again, the Jubilee Bible blows the King James Version out of the water with a far more accurate rendition of the Greek, where it says, Acts 20, beginning of verse 6, same passage. And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. Okay, this is, Passover time frame, between Passover and Pentecost, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. And the first of the Sabbaths, Miaton Sabaton, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart the next day, and continued his word until midnight. And if we need more proof that this is true, we see in verse 16 of Acts 20, for Paul had determined to sail to Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. And I say, to me, this is absolute proof that the first of the Sabbaths of Acts 20, verse 7, is a reference to the first of the 7 which are counted leading up to Pentecost, which Paul earnestly desired to keep, which shows a couple things. Paul's always preaching on the Sabbath, and he's always keeping the feast. He's like, man, if at all possible, I got to get back for the feast. And so you have a part right here that clearly I believe Luke is writing this, is telling you exactly the time frame that we should be thinking about, and it's in the time frame which is the only time when you count Sabbaths. So Miaton Sabbaton, meaning the first of the Sabbaths, makes absolute perfect sense in the context of what's being said right here. And again, the word day doesn't exist in the text, and the word for week is not Sabbaton. So, even the argument everybody uses for, first day of the week, if you really break it down, as I've done here, it doesn't hold water.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting that a lot of the translators translate it as first day of the week when it could definitely be taken in the context of what they were doing, what they were waiting for. The one thing that Yeshua tells them, when he ascends, is like, tarry, hang out, and they're waiting for the feasts. They're waiting for Pentecost to come about, and so it makes sense that they were counting the Sabbaths until the morrow after the Sabbath. It's literally a command in the Torah to count the accounting of the Omer. You're commanded to keep track of those days so that you can keep the feast on the appointed time. So what is the importance of feasts? I know a lot of people ask me, why feast? Why does it seem that Christians have at large lost an understanding of the significance of the feasts? Well, Satan's a liar, and he's come to steal, kill, and destroy, right? And I think the things that he targets the most are the things that offer us the biggest blessings, some of the most identity. Whenever you practice and keep feasts, you are getting on God's time clock, literally. You're trying to pay attention to his appointed times, and also going through the cycles reveals deeper things about Scripture. It reveals deeper aspects about who the Messiah is and the plan of redemption, and that's why he wants us to remember them. It's not to be legalistic. I've heard some of the most violent rejections of keeping the feasts is because that seems so much like bondage, and that doesn't make so much sense to me, because it's so awesome to get together with people and if everybody's there with a heart that's like, wow, I want to just learn more about the Father, I want to dig deeper, and they're there to celebrate a feast. Sometimes that's the best environment to be around believers who are there with a heart that's 100%ers. They're there because they're all in, and they just want to, they've gained the identity of Israel. That's what the book's about, is we're regaining our identity as Israel. And whenever we participate in the feasts, whenever we, put a sign on our door frames, whenever we wear the tassels, that is us grabbing hold of our identity as Israel. And that's so exciting that the Messiah has allowed us to be able to do that, to be able to say, all right, that is who I am now. I am one of God's people, and to be set apart and to be God's people, you do the things that he gave us. So I think talking about feasts and Sabbath is just so important, and especially with this Torah portion talking about signs and being reminded of your identity as Israel, constantly having something on your doorway to remind you, or the tassels or the tefillin. I do want to have you talk a little bit more about tefillin, and the kind of what the Jews do today. Do you have kind of any understanding of why they have been led to actually do the wrapping of the leather and binding the boxes? Is there any reason that they decided to interpret the command and apply it that particular way?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, they're being literalists. If you look at it, the way it's written, it does. I could see good reason why somebody could take it literally in that sense and just say, okay, I'm going to bind this to my hand and to my head. Now, is it really being? I think that's open to your interpretation. I can understand how it could be taken literally, and I can understand how it could be taken figuratively. I can honestly see both sides, but I like the way you just articulated it about embracing our identity. And let me just be clear to anybody out there who may be thinking this: we are not talking about replacement theology. Quite the opposite, actually. And I maintain that usually the people who are pointing the fingers saying, that's replacement theology, they're actually the ones that are believing in replacement theology, because they believe for thousands of years the whole plan of God was all about Israel. Israel, 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 then cross, boom, church.
Yeah.
And it's like, in their theology, they have put it, and according to them, God has basically put Israel aside, and he's playing around with this thing called the church now for 2,000 years. Then, usually in that same theology, God's going to take the church out and then beat the snot out of his previous wife until she loves him again. We're going to escape the tribulation, and the tribulation is really for the Jews, so the Jews would come back to God. That's in a nutshell the way they believe. So I'm like, no. You believe in replacement theology. I believe in grafting, according to Romans chapter 7 through 11, with the focus on chapter 11 specifically, where it comes right out and tells you, look, you got two trees. You got a cultivated olive tree, which is ethnic Israel, the 12 tribes that descended from Jacob, Isaac and Abraham. If you're in that tree and you reject the Messiah, then your branch is cut off. If you're over here in this crazy wild tree over here that has no blood relation to this tree, but you believe in Yeshua, then you get grafted into that tree. So it's you're either of one or the other, or getting grafted or taken out of one or the other. And I would say that if you don't believe in Yeshua and you're of this tree, you are grafting yourself into the wild tree. You're saying, I don't want to be in this tree anymore. I'm going to go with the crazy pagans. And if you're a crazy pagan, you say, I believe in this Jewish Messiah. I'm out of that tree and putting it in this one. That's grafting. I mean, it's so easy. It's so simple. And another way I could relate it is, I've said this before, but I really truly believe that Yahuwah picked my wife, and when he picked my wife, he knew that she had a son, and that I would give him my name. It's effectively adopting him into the Skiba tree, if you will, grafting him into my tree. He is of a different tree genetically from me, but he has taken on my family identity. And so after we got married, he started wearing baseball shoes. He played baseball in school and whatnot. His baseball jersey had my name identity across his back. So, and I mean, it's a beautiful illustration of how, somebody who is not a people becomes a people. And biblically speaking, you who are not a people shall be a people, meaning Israel. You who are not a Skiba shall be a Skiba. I could take the same analogy and migrate it over into my marriage to Sheila and adoption of Jeremiah. So, my family has traditions. We have things that we do that were different from his ancestry. And so it's like, look, you could wear my name. You're going to be heir to whatever I have to leave when I, if the Lord tarries and I grow old and die, then, what is mine, you inherit, so you are heir to, whatever I have to leave you. You can participate in my family's traditions to whatever degree you want to. So, and if he chooses to do so, then he is embracing his new identity. He's saying, okay, I'm a Skiba, and what you were saying earlier is exactly what, I'm like, why is it considered bondage to decide you want to throw off Christmas and Easter and do Passover and tabernacles and stuff instead? I mean, I never thought of Christmas and Easter as bondage. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, geez, I don't really have the money to buy Christmas presents this year. But, it was never a thought of, oh, the bondage, oh, the legalism of Christmas and Easter. I can't take it. You legalists. We never thought that way. So why do people all of a sudden think that way when we throw off the beast feast and decide to do what God actually said to do? That he said, hey, look, I created holidays, holy days, that I want to celebrate with you. And people are, oh, it's legalism. And part of it is we have been like mind controlled into thinking, well, this is the feast of the Jews. I mean, I would have said that too 8 years ago. Oh, it's the feast of the Jews. But if you actually go back and look at Leviticus 23, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel and saying to them concerning the feast of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, not the Jews, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts, not the feast of the Jews. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, and holy convocation ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, not the Jews. I mean, you could go through the whole Bible and see that they're his feasts. They're not the feasts of the Jews. So, I mean, a big part of our problem is mind control, and people just parroting, they hear something and they're taught something at a seminary or whatever, and then they just parrot it at, in the pulpit, and then the laity listens to the dude in the pulpit and, give him some measure of authority that he's the smart guy, so we just believe whatever he says. And then we go around saying the same thing. Well, that's if he said Jews, don't get me into bondage. It's like, what? It doesn't make sense when you actually take the time to look into it for yourself.
Yeah, I was talking with Lex Meyer, and he was describing to me the process of going to seminary, going to Bible college, and the way he described his kind of journey through Bible college was he went into school and he noticed that everybody kind of had really flimsy, kind of just Sunday morning theology, and whenever they got to college, the professors would just fillet people, and after they would fillet them, they would then give them their own, this is basically the Word of God interpretation, and that's why people would buy into it, because first, these professors, they see all the contradictions that, they see a lot of these contradictions, that they fillet people's theology, depending on whatever denomination they're coming from, and then they present them with a just as slightly skewed theology, And, I think the whole concept of identity is so important for believers. In today's day and age, we are in a time that people are searching for identity. It's so obvious. You have the gender, pronoun identity search that is just, seems to be catching fire. You have people looking for identity in all different types of places. My generation, the millennial generation, they're one of the most lacking generations in the church, and it's because they definitely don't see an identity in just going and keeping Sunday country club church. There's not something there for them, and I think that's so disheartening, because I remember growing up, the whole concept of finding an identity was so awesome to me. I always thought it would be awesome to be like somebody who had like Italian lineage, because they're part of the family, being on the inside, having a cultural identity, and it's something that the Messiah completely offers us, and I think that's so tragic that that so many people preach against the feasts, against wearing tzitzits. That's part of something that sets you apart and says, look, I'm the Father's, I'm a son of the Father, I'm walking like the Messiah. And that's like an identity that I know that I was hungry for all growing up, even in the church, because you don't truly get an identity whenever you're just going on Sunday and Wednesday night. It's whenever you make your life your faith that it becomes your identity, and you start to walk out and you bear that cross. You live and walk as the Messiah, because your faith is not just something that's part of your life, which is often what we see. People need to get on fire and really make their faith their life, and that's when it becomes your identity. Because whenever you're like, I'm keeping the feast this year, I'm so excited, I'm going to be meeting up with my brothers and sisters that are all keeping the feasts, and whenever you're getting together, you're doing the Torah portions like we do each week with the virtual house church and our own fellowships. That's an identity. That's actually saying, I'm set apart, I want to be Israel, and that's something that it's important. We want to be Israel. That's the people that He saves. It's Israel that throughout the Bible we see that He's stepping in and He's saving, and He's rescuing. And I want to be called Israel. I want to be called by that name. So I think that's kind of partially what this portion is really bringing out, is just the idea of are you willing to identify as Israel? Are you willing to put something on your door that your neighbors might see that identify you as Israel? Are you willing to wear something that would identify you as Israel? And most importantly, what we covered with the tefillin, are you willing to let your actions, what you do with your hand, willing to make your actions demonstrate that you're part of Israel, and just as much as your thought process?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have a couple questions that are coming in. That's pretty much all I had to kind of discuss tonight on the portion, I guess.
All right. Yeah.
And so we have a question coming in from X Panzer, and they ask, how do you honor this commandment in your lives? And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. So I guess along the
Well,
lines
that's
of
what we've been talking
the
about.
film. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, how do they apply the commandment of the tefillin?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we have been talking about here. What is that verse specifically? I'm trying to find it. Oh, that's what I made before. Verse 18 of what is it? Chapter 11. Therefore, you shall lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. I mean, the whole language right there. I mean, the entire verse seems to me, and I could be wrong. I think, like I said, I can see justification for a literal, let's go ahead and tie something to our hand. But if you're going to do that, well, how are you going to do the rest literal? You know what I mean? Lay up these words in your heart and in your soul. Okay, how do you do that? Literally. Like physically. How do you do that? Now, if I take it as an idiom and say, okay, I'm going to take these words to heart and I'm going to apply these words to my actions and to my thoughts, then to me, the thought process is cohesive through the whole verse, that we're using figures of speech, if you will. But there are people who say, well, okay, yeah, I'm going to lay these words up in my heart and in my soul as a figure of speech, but then I'm going to physically take something and wrap it around my hand or stamp something between my eyes. You know what I mean? I mean, okay, if that's the way you're led to interpret that, great. And Orthodox rabbinic Jews do that. They got a box between their eyes on their forehead, and they got stuff wrapped around their hands. Okay, well, that's how you've chosen to try to walk that out in a physical sense. I get it. Great. And I wouldn't say anything bad against anybody who would decide to do that. To me, when I look at this, the whole thing appears to be a set of figures of speech. Take it to heart, apply it to action, and think about it. That's the way I take it. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that's the way I'm reading this. Because I don't see sign of Yeshua walking around with that. I don't see any evidence in the New Testament that Yeshua or any of the apostles had a box between their eyes.
Am I breaking up? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. I can hear you.
All right. You're freezing up on my end.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I was just saying, I don't see anything in the New Testament that would lead me to believe that Yeshua walked around with a box between his eyes or anything specifically wrapped around his right hand. And so, if Yeshua didn't do it, but I do see evidence that he had tzitzit. So, he clearly saw where something is literal and tangible and has a physical expression, i.e. the tzitzit hanging from the four corners of his vesture. Okay, so he did that. But show me where Yeshua or any of the apostles or anybody else in the New Testament was walking around with a box between their eyes and something wrapped around their hand. To me, it seems that they had the same view of the scripture that I just described, that it's, a figure of speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's important, living it out. I think it's the whole idea of the mindset that the culture had is, whenever you are told something, it was. So first of all, it's the Greek mindset, which is you think, therefore you are, versus the Semitic Middle Eastern mindset, which is, if you did something, if you did the action, that would define who you were. Not so much the Greek mentality of just forms and it's all ethereal and I think, therefore I am. So, it's a parallel with how the culture of the time, how they had a mindset of doing, and it was the action that demonstrated your allegiance. Not if you thought in your head, oh, I love Jesus. It was you're walking out your life saying, I'm going to serve the Father. I'm going to serve and walk as the Messiah. Our next question coming in comes from Tal Thompson, and it says, I was recently debating someone about the issue of eating unclean foods and they pointed something out to me in Mark 7. We all know this forward and back, and I'm pretty sure most of us know that it's the go-to place for Protestants and Catholics to go for pro-pork arguments. But the person I was debating pointed out that in Mark 7, Jesus says that nothing that goes into a man can defile him, but he pointed out the nothing in that verse. Does that mean that eating unclean foods can make us unclean?
Okay, this one comes up a lot. Let me do a screen share here.
Sorry, I can't make us. Does that mean eating unclean foods can't make us unclean? Sorry, I read that wrong.
Well, this has come up a few times. So if people want to go to Leviticus week number 26, Shemini, and scroll down to, this is it right here. So did Yeshua, so did Yeshua declare all foods, meats, such as swine, clean, thus making something good that Yahuwah says is detestable? Some English translations of the Bible would have us believe he did. Mark 7:19 is often cited. And you can look at different ones, different verses, and depending on how, it's rendered, like in the NIV butchers it, in parentheses, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. Well, even if you went with that argument, even if you're using that translation, you would say declared all foods clean. Well, no Jew would have even ever remotely considered pork to be food. If I said to you, all the food in my refrigerator is clean, go for it, eat it. Would you eat the plastic that the ketchup was contained in? You could eat anything in my refrigerator. It's all good for you. Well, you're going to start eating the glass and the plastic and, no, there are things in the refrigerator that you just know are not food. So you're not even going to think of it that way. But that's not what this verse is saying anyway. You've got several of these that say, thus saying this, he declared all foods clean, blah, 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 blah. But when you go like King James and several other translations, I have it in red, they got it right. Because it entereth into his heart, entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, he goeth out into the drought, purging all meats. King James got this right. International Standard Version, because it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and then into the sewer, thereby expelling all foods. That's a really good translation right there to help you understand what's going on. American or Aramaic Bible in plain English, because it does not enter his heart, but his belly, and is discharged by excretion, which purifies all foods. What it's basically saying is, there's things that go into your heart and there's things that go into your stomach. The stuff that goes into your stomach gets crapped out. That's what it's saying. I'm being a little more crude here, but that's what it's saying. There's nothing here that says, and by saying this, he declared all foods clean. So you could go through this Leviticus week number 26 and read more on it, but there's quite a bit more here. I'm not going to take the time to do it here because we've already done a whole study on it. But and this is also a really good video I would point people to regarding the issue of clean and unclean foods. And it's on the bottom of this page right here. So Professor Walter Veith, as a scientist and a Christian, he looks at it, okay, this is what the Bible says, but as a scientist, why did God say that these particular animals are unclean? What is it about this animal's biology that makes it not good for us? So he tells you from a scientific point of view why that stuff's not good for you, and why Yahuwah said, hey, listen, stay away from that. So people who have got questions on that Mark issue and the issue of unclean foods in general, I would point them to Virtual House Church week number 26.
All right, and our next question coming in is from Chanel, and she asks, if we were to go to church on Sunday, would that be against God? I listen to you every Saturday, but go on Sundays as well.
Yeah, I don't have and I've said this a number of times before, and I'll say it again here. I think we should worship God every day. Sunday through Saturday, 7 days a week. I think we should worship God. I don't think there's anything wrong with worshiping God on any day or every day of the week. The issue is if you think that Sunday has replaced Sabbath. And if you're doing whatever you want to do on Sabbath, and then you're taking your day of rest on Sunday, that's when you have an issue. whether verbally or through your actions, whether in your thoughts or in your actions, forehead, hand, your actions are telling us whether or not you consider it a day of rest. Now, in our culture, except for in recent decades, it used to be nobody worked on Sunday. Like Sunday, you work your job, but you had Sunday off. People didn't typically get Saturday off. They got Sunday off because it was considered a day of rest. Which says to me, if you're considering it a day of rest, that you have made Sunday a Sabbath and replaced Saturday because you're doing, your normal stuff on Saturday that you're not doing on Sunday. So that's the only thing that I think, look, if you take Saturday or your Sabbath to rest, to honor the commandment and spend time in fellowship with your brothers and sisters and studying Torah, whatever you want to do, that's not your normal activity of work, keeping the Sabbath, and you go to church on Sunday, okay, that's great. That's wonderful. That's awesome. And I know people who do that, and they came out of Sunday, understood Sabbath, started to keep the Sabbath, but still like the fellowship with their friends and family that go to church on Sunday, and they want to continue to do that fellowship. That's great. That I don't see anything wrong with that, and I'll go on record as saying that, because some people are like, "Oh, you're saying, if you're on Sunday, you do Sunday, you're going to hell." I never said that. Just don't make Sunday your Sabbath, because it's not. That would be my only issue on that.
Yeah, I mean, I for quite some time went to a Sunday church. I think the most important thing, I was going to a Sunday church while also keeping Shabbat and fellowshipping with people on feasts and stuff. Is the most important thing is whenever you go to the Sunday keeping church, you got to understand that a lot of people there, they're not going to be receptive if you're, shoving down Sabbath and feast down their throat, in their Sunday keeping church. Oftentimes people have learned time and time again that they aren't very welcome after a long time if they're being a Torah terrorist, And so the process of going there, understanding that they don't have it revealed to them, the Father's not revealed to them, keeping Sabbath, eating kosher, the things that I know are probably very exciting and you want to share with them, but it's totally possible to fellowship and ease people into it. But it's so important to make sure you're walking it out and you're actually just, you're living it. And that's what hooks people. They say, hey, why do you not want to go out to eat with us on Saturdays? Or, why are you keeping these feasts? That's what hooks people, and it brings them in to ask more questions. And that's what I've found that where they're not fully on board is, whenever you just are living it around them, they're curious. You do run the risk of having to be forced to play church, and we don't want to do that. We're trying to get away from traditional religion. We're trying to get away from the corporate church that is, in a lot of ways, I think, you got to be careful being drawn into that system. But at the same time, it's totally a possible thing to fellowship. I've done it, and I know a lot of people who do. They look at it as a way of ministry. They want to share the truths that God's revealed to them to the people in the Sunday church. And a lot of us have family and friends who are not fully on board yet. So, the only way to really get around them and be able to talk scripture is go to Sunday church with them. So,
yeah, I mean, I get the heart. I understand that and the desire, that you expressed. But you got to be real careful with that. I mean, it's sort of like being a Baptist going to the Catholic Church, trying to just, pull everybody out of Catholicism into becoming a Baptist, or, Jehovah's Witnesses coming over to the Baptist church and trying to convert everybody. I mean, there's a fine line there. And other people will pick up on it. Look, if you're just coming here to tell us that we're wrong and that you're right, get out. Which is sort of the policy that I've instituted on a virtual house church that my moderators are taking a lot of heat for. But look, I trust my moderators. The reason I made them moderators is because they understand where I'm coming from. And so if you're going to come into the virtual house church Facebook page and try to convert everybody out of keeping Torah, out of keeping Sabbath and saying the feasts aren't for today and blah, 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 well, you're going to get booted. You're walking into an environment where we have said, look, we created this environment as a place where we believe X, Y, Z. This is what we believe here. So don't come over here thinking you're going to convert everybody. You're welcome to join us, but don't come here trying to convert everybody. And so that's the danger that you run into in becoming a Torah terrorist, and going to your Sunday church. If your ambition is to try to convert everybody out of Sunday church, it's probably not going to work. Trying to be a light and a testimony is one thing. And, like I've gone to Sunday church with my parents, and anytime I go back to Massachusetts to visit my family, I go to church, because I grew up in that church, and there's a lot of people there that I like and enjoy. Now, I go there knowing that it's probably going to be a very watered down message compared to what I'm used to. I'm used to chomping on steak every week, so it's going to be a milkshake at best, but probably more like water. I'm going to listen to things that I'm probably going to disagree with, because they're going to say things like, we don't need to keep the feasts and the dietary laws and blah, blah, blah. It's all nailed to the cross, yada, yada. I already know that going in. But as I've said before, like my parents invited me to they have a winter home that they're snowbirds. When they live in Massachusetts, it gets cold. They go down to Florida. They got a nice little trailer home down there. And invited me to their Baptist church down there for Easter. And we're sitting there in this Easter service, and the good old Baptist pastor, old guy, is up there, and he spends probably 25 minutes telling everybody why we know that Easter isn't the real day that he rose from the dead, and he didn't really die on Good Friday, and that 40 days of Lent and all that goes back to, he said what he preached clearly indicated he understood the truth. But then the inevitable word "but" came into the dialogue, and then the rest of the sermon was why we do it anyway. And so, in that situation, I have to believe that my parents, who have heard both my wife and I express our concerns about this issue, knew what we were saying at that point, because, you're not respected in your, even Jesus wasn't respected in his own hometown. A prophet's not hailed in his own hometown, right? I'm not saying a prophet or anything like that, but you know how it is. It's hard for any of us to reach our own family. They know who you are. They know what you've done in your life. There's, for whatever reason, there's that lack of respect in trusting what you have to say. But when somebody echoes everything that you've been saying, and that person's in a position of perceived authority, well, all of a sudden that just gave you some credibility, and all I had to do was look at them like, So, I think there's value in it, but we have to know what our place is if we're going to do that. I guess probably the best way to say it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I totally see what you're saying. We. If we're going into with the mindset that, we're going to win everybody over, you got to understand that it's the Father that reveals keeping his commandments, keeping his feasts and Sabbath. He reveals it to people. And I know I'm fascinated to find out what is the trigger in somebody's mindset that causes them to latch hold of this, because it's taken the world by storm. We see it everywhere, but I haven't nailed it down what exactly causes the scales to fall off somebody's eyes. And just love people, just love them, and understand that, if you compromise on your beliefs, then, that's a witness to them, and they'll be like, oh, well, I see you, compromising on the Sabbath. So why are you telling me it's important? So just remember that your life is the light. And that's the thing that draws people in to ask, what have you figured out? Why is this such a blessing to you? And whenever you approach it with the mindset of, I'm just going to be a light and I'm just going to love people, that's how we walk as the Messiah. We love him and we love our neighbor, and it's by and often, I hate whenever it gets so convoluted that, I'm trying to share the feast. It sounds like I'm bashing you over the head. But it's because I love you, because I want you to see the blessing, because I want you to take part in just the deepness of it, that I'm sharing with you, and that I'm so excited about it. And it's something that's caused because you love people and you want to share the validity of the feast, the validity and the blessing of keeping the word, that and whenever that's confused with, trying to bash somebody over the head, it's tragic. It's because I love you. I want you to see this too. But we can get excited.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was I had done this secular UFO conference in New Jersey. They brought me in. It's like the 54th annual UFO convention or whatever, and I was brought in as sort of the token Christian to come bring a different point of view. But that conference happened on a weekend just before Passover. And since I was already in New Jersey, it's not that far of a drive to Massachusetts. So we thought, you know what, let's go visit my family. And so Sheila and I had this idea of sort of ambushing my parents with a Passover meal. We're like, hey, we'll dinner's on us, kind of thing. And we're thinking, okay, we can go to the store and get some lamb, and we had this whole plan of what we were going to do to sort of Passover ambush my parents. Like, hey, dinner's on us, right? And as we're kind of thinking through all that, I get a message from my mom saying, "Oh, we're so excited! I've got dinner on and everything." Like, Mom had already prepared dinner before we could really kind of initiate our plan. And so oh man, she's already got dinner planned and everything. So we just said, well, let's just pray about it and play it by ear. So when we got there, Mom had dinner and everything. She knows not to make ham or anything like that with us. So she's, my parents are cool with that, even though I catch them eating bacon and stuff all the time, but they never, whenever we're eating corporately, they never put it in front of us. But so Mom had this whole thing set up. So we said, well, let's just go get some wine. So we got some wine and we had some, I'm trying to think, I think we might have got some matzah bread, if I remember right. And so we got there and it's great to see you, love you, blah, 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 oh, wow, it smells good, Mom, and all that. Hey, we brought a couple things, if we can add to the dinner. And, as we're sitting there, I said, today's Passover, and, we didn't want to make a big deal out of it or anything like that, but, it's something that's become important to us, and we just kind of like to share it with you. I mean, it is the day that, Jesus died, and I'll use Jesus, instead of Yeshua with my parents most of the time. And we had if you go on the Virtual House Church, let me show you, if you go to virtualhousechurch.com, and then in the main menu, if you scroll down to where it says Passover, Pesach Passover, there's this right here, the Passover movie. And this is, what is it? It's a 50-minute, 49-minute, 37-second video. And it's, basically a step up from a stage drama. It's like a theatrical play, but it's been filmed in such a way that it's sort of like a mini movie. If you're looking for like crazy, cool, amazing production value, it's not there, but it's a good story. And my parents have been in theater with me. We started the drama ministry in our church together, and they've been a part of pretty much any play that I ever wrote and directed, produced at church as part of the drama ministry, and also did some outside community theater stuff with me and stuff too. They love the theater, so I thought this would be something cool that they could watch that would say everything that I want to say anyway, but in a way that they could probably receive it better than me, trying to put it on them. And so we just had the meal that my mom prepared for us. We did a little bit with the breaking of bread and the wine. And I said, can I show you a video? I think it's really cool. And it's a stage play on Passover. And they said, yeah, sure. So we sat in a room and watched it, and they actually really liked it. And if you watch the movie, it is a great way to kick the door open to some good dialogue afterwards. And I won't ruin it for anybody that wants to watch it, but I think it's a well done story, and the way everything plays out in the story is done in such a way that it naturally opens the doors for continued dialogue afterwards. At least it did with my family. So it was, I think that's the way it needed to be. We came in there with sort of our Torah terrorist mentality of converting my family. But this was a much nicer, calmer. There was no argument. There was no debate. There was just a sweet time of fellowship and a good time of discussion afterwards. Best I could have hoped for.
Yeah, I think the feasts. We had Zach Bauer at the past conference, the declaring the end from the beginning, declaring the end from the beginning conference. He was talking about Torah apologetics and how really defining first what sin is and showing the blessing and the depth of the feasts is how we should really be approaching people with this topic, people who've been Christians for many years. It's a big pill for them to swallow, to hear that they've been missing out on something, or they've not realized the value of something that it matters so much to Yahweh. And so really showing the feasts to Christians and to people who might be keeping the traditional holidays. You want to show them the blessing that they're missing, not necessarily just point and say cursed, because it's the blessing that seems to make people think, oh wow, it's cool to learn about the feast, it's cool to practice it, and they see that, oh wow, it's because it's such a blessing that Satan's tried to steal it from us. So we have another question coming in from Cassius. And he asks, can Rob please explain a little bit about Ezekiel 37 and how it has to do with the ones who were never related to the Savior?
How it relates to the ones that never... I'm not sure I understand the question.
So Ezekiel 37 and how it has to do with the ones who were never related to the Savior.
It's the dry bones. Yeah. Well, I mean, the bones represent, I mean, it tells you point blank, this is the house of Israel, right? This is the famous story of, those dry bones, and the bones start to come together, and then the sinews and muscles and the flesh and everything comes together on it. Well, it also says this, it's got the two sticks too. Let me just do a screen share here so everybody's looking at the same thing I am. So yeah, it starts off, prophesy to the bones come together, all that. When you get to after it does the bone story, it talks about the two sticks. And you got the stick of Ephraim, for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions, and you have the stick of Judah. Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions, and then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Both, they're two different sort of visions, parables, if you will, for the same thing, in my opinion. But it's easier for me to describe the two stick issue is because when it's talk about Ephraim, that's the northern kingdom. That's the part that was divorced, Jeremiah chapter 3. And if you go back to, what is it, I think Genesis 48, I believe, where Jacob is prophesying over Joseph's sons, and Manasseh's the older one and should have been received the right hand blessing, but he crossed his hands and put his hand over Ephraim instead of over Manasseh. And Joseph's like, no, this is my oldest son. He goes, I know, I got it. He says, Manasseh will be great too, but Ephraim is where it's really at. There's going to be he's going to become a multitude of nations, Ephraim. And so the northern kingdom, when they got dispersed into all the world, they became known as Ephraim because it became a multitude of nations by getting dispersed. And so you only have two sticks. There's not a third twig somewhere labeled the church. So if you are outside of the family, a non-Christian who doesn't believe in Messiah, then you're not in here. But if you have believed in Messiah, then you are grafted on, I believe. You're grafted. Some would say you're grafted on the stick of Judah because Messiah is of the line of Judah. And I understand the reasoning. Sure. Okay. But based on Genesis 48, I tend to believe, no, as a wild olive tree branch, I'm grafted into the stick of Ephraim. I believe, based on the prophecy. And reading the book of Hosea. I mean, if you read the whole book of Hosea in reference to what I'm saying here, I think it makes the most sense that we're grafted onto Ephraim. But either way, I don't care which one I'm grafted, as long as I'm on one of these two sticks, because there's only two sticks. So you're going to be on one, or you're going to one or the other, or you're not part of the family. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way I understand what's being asked here.
Yeah, we have another question coming in from Alex, and he's asking, I quit cold turkey going to church on Sunday while I was on the worship team as the drummer. Big deal in modern music. Did I do it the right way? I have a lot of people upset that I left and wondering what happened. Should I go back to play again?
Well, I mean, pray about it, obviously. I think what's going to happen because you're going to find yourself unequally yoked, because they're not going to be on your page. If you've given up Sunday to go to do Sabbath, they're going to be giving you trouble for it. And, now, if you're one of those that can do both, great. I mean, if you can maintain your sanity doing both and consider it part of your ministry, okay. I wouldn't see any reason not to do it. I mean, if somebody asked you to play drums on Monday or Tuesday to lead worship or something, would you do it? Sure. I mean, probably, so, I mean, you're just gonna have to pray about it. And, I know for me, I couldn't hang out in a Sunday church for very long. It'd drive me crazy. It's okay visiting with my family every now and then, but yeah, to me, I'm like, well, first of all, I'm a workaholic, so just taking a day off period is difficult. Taking 2 days off, forget it. So I've already taken my time off on Saturday. So Sunday, boom, I'm back to work and like happy doing it. But if I wasn't that type of person, and I played an instrument and I loved what I did, and I'm considering it my personal act of worship, this is where I'm giving back my gifts, talents, and abilities to God, then that would be an opportunity for me to do so. I'd be like, okay, cool, because I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker. If I have a chance to do that on Sunday, I'm doing it. In fact, this Sunday I'm on a roll right now, man. My creative juices have been flowing like Niagara Falls the last couple of weeks. I can't stop writing. I'm like writing like a maniac lately. And so, as soon as I'm done with Sabbath, I'm writing again. So for me, that's my drum set. The question would be whether you can do it in a way that still maintains peace of mind for yourself and not cause a problem in the church, because you don't want to be a Torah terrorist while you're doing it. It goes back to our previous discussion.
All right, that's the last question that we have for this Torah portion. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to send them in on the chat. Of course, I guess, do you have any other comments on this particular portion?
Yeah, I actually wrote in what's this, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 22 and 23. For if ye shall diligently keep all these commandments which I command you to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to cleave unto him, then will the Lord drive out all the nations from before you, and ye shall possess greater nations and mightier than yourselves. And I wrote in my notes on there, I said, that's the true IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. The true Israeli Defense Force, not knocking the soldiers over there. Those are fine soldiers and some of the best in the world, actually. But the reason they're constantly having to fight all the time with somebody is because, if they would just get back to Leviticus 18 through 26, Leviticus 26 in particular, and he's like, look, if you obey me, I'm going to chase the weapons out of your land, the animals that could hurt you. I'm going to do this. You will live in peace. One will chase 10, or 10 will chase 100 or whatever. No one's going to bother you if you obey me. And, it's reiterated here in Deuteronomy. then the Lord will drive out all these nations from before you. The Lord will do it. Yahuwah will do it. That's a true IDF right there. And earlier I wrote a note that, this is for our health also there's a promise of health in Deuteronomy 7:15. And the Lord will take away from thee all sicknesses and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt on you. If you just obey him. And this goes to, Egypt and Babylon, you got a lot of same, there's some similarities there. And the call of the last days is to come out of Babylon. Why? So you do not partake of her plagues. People always say, well, Christians aren't appointed unto wrath. Well, that's true. They're not. Babylon is. But if you decide to hang out in Babylon, do what Babylon does, well, then you're going to get it's not supposed to be coming to you, but you've chosen to go where the wrath is coming, where the diseases and plagues are coming. There's a reason there's swine flu and things like that. I mean, if you're going to disobey God, it's not going to go well for you. You're not going to be healthy. You're going to have people coming at you from every direction, especially if you're living on that plot of land that is, I believe, the Garden of Eden, frankly. But it's Yahuwah's land. It's his land. It's not the land of the Jews. It's his land. He's the landlord. He's got rules. As long as you're obeying the rules, he says, look, I'll take care of you. But if you're not going to obey me, you're going to, you wonder why all the nations of the world are always pointing their guns at Israel? Well, to me, I'm like, look, just if you guys would just read Leviticus 26 and as a nation commit to it, if you're going to call yourself Israel and say, hey, we're Israel. Okay. Well, Israel's got rules, and if you obey them, well, there's a tremendous reward for doing so. But if you're going to, proudly proclaim yourself to be, the gay, lesbian capital of the world and live a completely secular life and not obey the Torah and do everything opposite of what the Torah says, well, then, okay, you're going to deal with the consequences of that. I didn't say it. That's what it says here, So that was just one of the things that one of the comments I had. I had a couple other little notes there.
We have someone named Joff who wrote in a comment and said, on a note about grafting into the cultivated tree of Israel, one thing that is important is in order to be grafted in, you must first be broken off of the wild tree first.
Correct.
We must break away from the world, from Babylon, and put away the pagan festivals and traditions. Just food for thought. So, in this whole process, I know we're talking a little bit about, going into Sunday church and separating or not separating, but, what are some more things that, as you're separating from Babylon, what are you finding, things that you're needing to separate? What are some areas that people should be looking into to separate from Babylon? How do we separate from Babylon so we don't partake in the plagues? What are some of the things that we can be doing to separate?
Well, I think it's an evolving process for a lot of us, like where you start reading. Okay, first thing you're thinking, okay, 10 commandments, 10, not 9, 10. So for many of us, it's realized the fourth is still very important, and actually going back to last week's Torah portion goes through the 10 commandments again. In Deuteronomy chapter 5 is where he gives the 10 commandments again. And, he basically lists each one in a sentence or two, each of the commandments. But when you get to the fourth commandment, he gets like 4 or 5 verses dedicated to that one commandment. The fourth commandment has the most textual real estate devoted to it in the recap of the 10 commandments. So I'm going, clearly this is important to Yahuwah. This is a huge deal to him. And it's the only commandment that begins with the word remember. So it gives all, and one of the things that we pointed out in our home study group was, when the first time it's given, it's talking about 4 and 6 days, Yahuwah created the heaven and the earth. And on the 7th day, he rested. So the Sabbath, originally as it was first given to them, was described as something to remember the creation account. And then when you look at the Deuteronomy recap of the 10 commandments, It says, and remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. So there's another reason for the Sabbath day here. And Kevin, our group leader, he speculated, he says, isn't it interesting that the first time the fourth commandment is given, it's a callback to creation. 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, 7th day he rested, so therefore you rest to remember my rest. And then the second time it says, hey, I took you out of Egypt and now remember the Sabbath because of that also. And Kevin said, well, if we go back to the idea of a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day, then the millennial reign of Christ is the 7th God day of humanity historical rest. In other words, 6,000 years, God is striving with man. He's long suffering. He's patient. He's working with us. He's like, okay, this is my plan for you. This is what I've done for you. Just please believe it. Come on, I'm believing in you. I'm holding out for you. I'm chasing you. I'm doing everything I can to draw you to me. But he's going to rest on that 7th millennial reign. Like, okay, all that striving is done. I'm bringing my kingdom down on earth, and you're either in or out. If you're in, if you keep the commandments and you have a relationship with Yeshua. If you don't, you're out. You're either in, you're out. It's almost like, it's first I've ever heard of it, and Kevin was just throwing the idea out that God's like, okay, he's done with his work on humanity to try to draw us to him. It's like you're either in or you're out. If you're in, great. You got 1,000 years to rest with him, hang out. It's great. Whatever we're going to be doing, I don't know. But there's a different paradigm in that 1,000-year millennial reign compared to the 6,000 years prior. I'm going, that's interesting. Something to think about, something to consider. But so the biggest part of it, I think, for me, in coming out of Babylon is realizing just how important that fourth commandment is, and that we still have 10, not 9. And then the question naturally follows, well, you keep the whole Torah? Do you really keep Torah? You're a hypocrite. You don't really keep Torah, blah, blah, blah. There's 613 commandments, blah, blah, blah. Well, that always comes out. When you look at the 613, they are just elaborations on how to do the 10. I mean, the first 4 or 5 commandments are how you have a relationship with God, how you love him, how you relate to him, how you serve a holy God. And the remaining commandments are our relationship with man. That's why Yeshua just distilled the 10 down to 2. He says, look, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 hang all of the law and the prophets. So the 10 are hanging from the 2, and the 613 are hanging from the 10. But it all ultimately boils down to, how do I love and serve a holy God, and how do I love and serve my fellow man? And your process of coming out of Babylon is learning how to walk that out. And I'm still learning. We're all still learning. For me, I have settled on ditching the pagan stuff as much as I'm aware of, and as I become aware of new things, I'm like, okay, well, that's got to go too. You sort of go from, okay, that was heavy, and you figured out that, and you're walking that for a while, and then all of a sudden God shines a light on, you got that one, cool. Here's something else to work on. Oh, I got to work on that. I mean, it took me, 3 or 4 years before I started wearing tassels. Because I wasn't convinced that, as a New Testament Bible-believing Christian with the Holy Spirit in my heart, that, if I'm the temple, he's in me, what do I need stuff hanging from my clothes for? That was my attitude. But after 3 or 4 years of studying Torah and going through Numbers 15, going, well, finally it just gets to you, and you're like, yeah, I think we're supposed to still be doing this, And so then you do that, you start learning more about the feasts and what to do, like unleavened bread. For a long time, this is my 7th or 8th, I forget now, year of going through this. I understood, okay, get the leaven out. So you start getting the leaven out of your house. And people say, well, that's just spiritual. You're supposed to get sin out of your life. Well, yes and no. Sure, there's a spiritual principle there that we should be trying to do every day of our life all year long, not just during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But if you go back and read the commandment, because some people say, is it about cleaning your life out of sin or is it about baking goods? Well, the answer is yes. It's both. Yes, the principle leaven as being associated with sin is a principle, but leaven is also associated with the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is like leaven, so, but the commandment is to get the baking goods out of your house. I mean, that is the commandment. So you learn the process of, okay, there's a spiritual principle, but then you say, well, wait a minute, no, there's actually, I mean, if I'm reading the commandment, there's actually go get the physical stuff out of your house that's considered leaven. So that's a growth process. And I had been going through that process for a few years and understanding and trying to walk in that. But it was like literally this year that the light bulb went off in my head that I'm also supposed to be eating unleavened bread. I'm not just supposed to get the leaven out, but the command is also, you shall eat unleavened bread. And like this year's unleavened bread came and went, and I had been abstaining from leavened bread, but I hadn't been eating unleavened bread. So I'm going, okay, well, didn't get that one this year or last year or the year before, but next year I'm going to make a point of adding that to what I'm trying to do as I'm learning to walk this out and getting more and more revelation in doing so. I'm like, okay, I did it wrong before, I'll get it right this time, and I have, and this may change, but as of today, my current understanding is, as a new covenant believer in the order of Melchizedek, what is left for me to still do of the Torah basically comes down to the 10 Commandments, the seat, the feasts, and the dietary. That's where I'm at right now. Could there be more? Sure, could be. But at this point in my walk out of Babylon, these are the steps that I have taken and I'm still taking, and I'm trying to walk out appropriately, accurately, according to the scriptures. So, and that's why I created that page, coming out of Babylon, is specifically to address that question, because the videos that are on there will help people to begin to understand that.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question coming in is from Jay Cassius, and he asks, what is your opinion on Black Hebrew Israelites and their teaching that only their kind can be saved?
Oh boy. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. In my experience dealing with these people, they're very militant, and it's just another form of racial prejudice. I have yet to find anybody that's in that sect that has treated me with any measure of civility. As soon as we get into it and I express my disagreement with it, all of a sudden I'm a racist, I'm a pig, and I'm doomed to hell, and all kinds of. I mean, they're very, at least in my experience, I can't speak for everybody else, but in my experience dealing with these people, they're very hostile, very militant, and they're looking down their nose at me as a, and some going so far as to say that because of my skin color, I'm an offspring of the Nephilim. So, I mean, the whole thing gets crazy, but I just say, look, Noah and his wife had 3 sons. They all looked the same. They would have, Noah and his wife would have reproduced and produced the same. And I believe that there was less radiation to deal with in the pre-flood world. And because of that, I believe that there was less need for melanin. And Adam's name means red. It doesn't mean black, brown, or even pale, white for that matter. He was probably more of Native American kind of skin tone, I suppose, reddish in color, which would be an appropriate amount of melanin probably for the temperate zone where he lived. And then after the flood, you had Shem, Ham, and Japheth that I believe all look the same, skin tone wise. In fact, the Cush, his name means black. So I don't see any evidence that Ham was black, but I do see evidence that Cush was black, and Cush is Ethiopia, and Ethiopians are black. Well, if you look at where a lot of Ham's descendants went, they went into a climate zone where the sun is a whole lot hotter. And in those temperate zones where it's a lot hotter, God, in his supernatural sovereign wisdom, placed different types of plants that actually increase the body's ability to produce melanin to protect the skin against the harmful radiation of the sun. That's God's awesome model. You say, okay, if you're going to live here, you're going to eat this food. If you eat this food, your body's going to produce melanin. You're not going to have as much skin problems, because of where you live. But if you move further north, those plants aren't there. You're not going to need that. It gets colder, and so your body's going to start to metabolize fat differently. And Eskimos are very different physiologically than people who grow up on the equatorial plane. This is just all adaptation that God has placed, in man, the ability to survive in these different temperate zones. So that's number one. God doesn't care about our skin color, for crying out loud. If we're going to argue about melanin, okay, tell me what, I was laid out at the sun at the pool today. I was out for an hour. Tell me the shade that I need to acquire so that I can make sure that I'm in the in group with melanin. Because, if it's about melanin, I'll go out and lay out in the sun and make sure that I qualified for the shade. And I need to know the shade. Somebody's got to tell me the shade, because there's really black, there's brown black, brownish black, there's more tan. What's the shade? Give me the shade, okay? But even if you go that route, if you think, well, it's all about the shade, well, the shades are all together with the whiteys in the plains of Shinar under the leadership of Nimrod. They're mixing together, all together. Right? And then at the Tower of Babel, they're dispersed. And then, God, through Abraham, picks Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, come out of that. And then they're all together in Egypt, mixing with other people, because there's a mixed rabble that went out into the wilderness with them for 40 years. So they're mixing with them. Then they get together and they form this land of Israel that gets divided, northern and southern kingdom. And then the northern kingdom, Israel/Ephraim, got dispersed into all the world 2,730 years ago, more than that, actually, and were thoroughly mixed with all the other shades there are on the earth. Thoroughly mixed with all the other shades there are on the earth for over 2,730 years. So to say that only this shade of people are true Israel is patently absurd. It's utterly ridiculous. And the slam dunk nail in that coffin for me is Romans 11. It doesn't say only such and such skin color shade is Israel. It says cultivated olive tree, wild olive tree. Believe in the cultivated olive tree, Messiah, you're grafted in. I don't care what your nationality is or what your skin tone is. So the whole argument is utterly, patently absurd, totally, completely illogical, and is nothing but another excuse to foster prejudice, in my opinion. And it angers me. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit passionate about this because I have to deal with these people all the time. And I'm like, your argument is just ridiculous on so many levels, but it ultimately boils down to prejudice, in my opinion.
Yeah, we all bleed red, and whenever you got some green or blue blood, then we can start having a discussion there. But we're all human, and it's crazy that they it's really a racist position that is once again kind of trying to be an elitist mentality. It's no better really than Aryanism that was going on during the time of Hitler and their elitism with the way they viewed the Aryan race. So we have another question coming in.
But here's the other problem I have. It is Aryanism in the reverse, but the other problem I have is they'll point to the passages in Scripture, in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and whatnot, and say, well, black people are the only ones that fit these curses. You're going to be taken away in ships and blah, blah, blah. Well, I would contend that the prophecy that was described there was fulfilled a long, long, long time prior to, people being grabbed as slaves and brought to America, which is usually where they go. See, we were put in ships and dragged out of our native land of Africa and made the slaves to the evil white man in America. So that's talking about us. I'm like, okay, well, let's go with that patently absurd premise. I'm okay. I'll go with that for a minute. You are wearing the curse as a badge of honor. You see, this is me. And the people that I've had the most trouble with, I'm like, well, if you believe this is you, then this happened to you because of disobedience to Yahuwah. And you want to claim that everybody in Africa is black, and you get mad whenever a white person is depicted as a pharaoh or something in a movie. I mean, if you put white people in movies about Egypt, everybody goes psycho because everybody has to be black. I'm like, well, okay, if you're going to say that, then you had black people, because you're saying everybody in Egypt is black, and all the pharaohs are black, and everybody's black, and so are the Hebrews. All the Hebrews and the Israelites, they're all black. So then you have black people enslaving black people, and you're mad at the white people? I mean, you guys are enslaving yourselves in that story. And if you want to get out of the curse, then the way out of the curse, according to the same scriptures you're quoting, is to obey God. And the same people that were coming after me, I was trying to get them to say, look, then get rid of Christmas, get rid of Easter, get back to Torah, get back to the feasts, end your curse. And they were calling me a heretic for that, because many of these people that I was dealing with are dispensationalists, preacher of rapture, standard Christian wanting to wear the badge of Israel, and calling me a heretic for having the audacity to suggest that it might be a good idea to obey God, and thumbs upping and rah Chris Putnam when he was going psycho on me and calling me of the devil, for trying to suggest that it might be a good idea to obey God. And I'm going, something's not computing here, dude, because I'm saying we should obey God. You're wearing a badge of honor saying that you guys are the ones that fit the curses, but the curses come from disobedience to God, and you're being mad at me for saying we should obey God. I don't get it. It's the people are crazy out there. I mean, they just are. Sorry.
Yeah. Our next question is from Valerie, and she asks, what is the outer darkness spoken of in the millennial reign when he talks about throwing them into outer darkness?
That's an interesting question, because based on the biblical cosmology that I have embraced, I do believe that there is an outer darkness beyond the dome, which is actually, interestingly enough, well depicted in the Truman Show, the movie. The Truman Show. If you've seen the movie, Truman was trying to go to Tahiti or wherever it was, and he heads up there and he runs into the wall. And he's walking along the edge of the dome, and he sees a staircase. And he goes up the staircase, and he opens a door, and right behind him, it's pitch black. On the other side of that door, pitch black. And then Christoph, who is the creator of the dome, tries to stop him and convince him to stay. He's like, it's no better out there, but at least in here, you're loved and protected. And basically, at the end of the movie, Truman's like, nope, I'm out of here. And he walks off into outer darkness. And I'm going, there's that. But I'm also thinking that when it talks about the New Jerusalem and the kingdom that comes down and everything, that you're not going to need the sun and moon for light anymore, because the light is going to emanate from Yeshua, I think, ultimately. And so if you're in that kingdom, if you're in the New Jerusalem, well, you have the light of God. If you're out of the New Jerusalem, you're in outer darkness. So I think there's two, at least for me, I'm seeing two ways to look at the outer darkness in a physical, literal sense.
All right, our last question is coming in from Eridavimin, and they ask, do you have anything to expound upon on the greater Exodus? Or Eric, his name's Eric. So Eric is asking for you to expound upon the greater Exodus.
Well, yeah, in 2 minutes, that's not really going to... we're not going to be able to do that in 2 minutes. I would direct you to Zach Bauer. He's got some great teachings on the greater Exodus. I talk about it also in my Ephraim Awakening. Again, if you go to robschannel.com and in the main menu, click on Facebook Notes, click on Ephraim Awakening, and at the top of the page, there's a video there that describes that. But to summarize it into a bullet point, I would basically say that because the northern kingdom has literally been dispersed into all the world, to the ends of the earth, so to speak, that when Yahuwah himself regathers Israel, as it's spoken of throughout the prophets, especially in the book of Hosea, but read Jeremiah 23 through 31, Ezekiel 37, Isaiah 65 and 66, along with the entire book of Hosea, and you'll see that he's pulling all of us who are grafted in, and I maintain that I believe Romans 11 and taking Romans 11 in conjunction with Genesis 48 and the prophecy and the divorce of Jeremiah 3, etc., that I'm grafted into Ephraim. And Ephraim was dispersed into all the world. So wherever you are in the world, if you've been grafted into the cultivated olive tree and you are part of what I call the Ephraim awakening, then when the time comes, and I don't believe it has happened yet, that God is going to literally pull us from all the nations of the world and gather us together. Probably, I would not be surprised if we end up at Mount Sinai again. Speculation, of course. But others have suggested the same thing, that we might be ending up in Africa or whatnot, and that we're going to have a time in the wilderness with God. There's going to be a purging. There's going to be a going under the rod, so to speak, to see whether or not you're worthy to continue on the journey. And then he will usher in a greater exodus, the whole house of Israel into the land of Israel in the last days and set up the millennial kingdom. So that's sort of a bullet point of it. But for a lot more detail, again, check out Zach's work. And if you want to watch the Ephraim Awakening, it's also in there.
All right, that's all. And that's, thanks for having the virtual house church again, Rob. It's been good as always.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thank you
for asking questions and being part of our fellowship. We love coming together and being able to talk about the Bible and go through the portion with everybody who's in the chat and over on YouTube. So also thanks to Kevin for moderating over on the YouTube chat. We appreciate you. All right. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and say Shabbat Shalom and good night, everybody. Take care, and until next time, we'll catch you on the flip side.
Bless you and keep you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you
resplandecer su rostro en ti y tenga de ti compasión. Yahuwah, alce su rostro sobre